Hi everyone, and welcome to this first session of Discovering Christ. In this series, we're going to introduce you to the real Jesus. Not what you think you know or what you may have heard on TV, but the real Jesus, who is far more relevant and real than you may realize. For the past 2,000 years, Jesus' message and mission has reshaped the meaning of life, the course of human events and the world in which we live. C.S. Lewis once said that Christianity, if false, is of no importance, but if true, is of infinite importance. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important. Maybe you've been hesitant about spiritual matters in the past because you really didn't see the point of it all. The pieces just weren't coming together for you, and so faith and Jesus just became another Sunday morning activity for you to schedule in an otherwise hectic life. Or perhaps you're really just new to all this stuff and you just wanted to learn more about the world in which we live, why we're here, where it's going, and why it all really matters. Whatever your reason, I'm glad that you're here, and I look forward to sharing this incredible journey with you. I've entitled this first session, Paradise Lost, and you'll see why in a minute or two. Today we're going to go way back to where it all began, and we're going to learn from the pages of history, and in the process, discover how we got here and why. Together we're going to follow the trail wherever it leads, but our goal is always to learn more about this wonderful, sometimes tragic and perplexing journey we call life. We are not physical beings having a spiritual moment. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience. Lee Remlett once said that without a map, every road looks promising. With the right map, the right road becomes obvious. So before we begin, we need a map, a place to start, and a path to follow. Now, in this journey, our map is going to be the Bible, and in its pages, God reveals who we are, who we're supposed to be, and how the world got the way it is. Before we get started, I wanted us to take an honest look around at the world in which we live. There are parts of our world that are incredibly beautiful, majestic, and breathtaking. From the oceans to the starry skies to snow-capped mountains, there are hints of beauty and glory everywhere. From the tiniest flower to the most graceful hummingbird, we see incredible detail and design in all aspects of life. Now, for centuries, this beauty has inspired philosophers, artists, saints, and poets who longed for an unspoiled place of rest, a place they often called paradise. Clearly, there's something going on here. There's more than just survival of the fittest, and from a random series of chemical reactions happening over and over time. Beauty and hints of something beyond the physical reality are telling us that there's something else going on here. But it is also obvious that something seems to have gone horribly wrong. Despite its bits of beauty here and there, the earth is filled with poverty, disease, violence, and death. This world can also be a very dark and sinister place. So how do we make sense of this contrast between beauty and brutality, compassion and cruelty, right and wrong, hope and despair? Why do we long for a paradise and yet live in a world of such pain? These are very big questions, and at the center of our journey, we're not going to hide behind simple answers or pretend they don't matter. It is here that we must begin. So let's go back, all the way back to the beginning of all things. Our story begins in Genesis. Genesis is a Hebrew word that literally means in the beginning of. In the beginning of everything, there was God. Genesis chapter 1. God is in the beginning. God is the artist, the author of our story. He is the potter and we are the clay. God is the reason that we're here. God is the inspiration for all that we see and all that we don't see. So to answer all of the questions of why and how, we must begin with a simple statement. It's all about God. The Bible opens with this incredible statement. It says, "In the beginning, God created. God spoke, and it was so." This amazingly complex, highly ordered, highly interdependent universe was created by a power far beyond anything that we can imagine. All that we know, the sun, the stars, galaxies, time, space, the animals, fish, oceans, He created it all by the power of His Word. Even our ability to think and to reason is a gift from God. Now in Psalm 14, verse 1, it says, "A fool says in his heart, 'There is no God.'" Now look around you. What do you see? I don't know about you, but I'm no fool. But many people don't see it that way. They don't see the creativity, they don't see the beauty, and why is that? Well, I remember someone once told me, an atheist cannot find God for the same reason a thief can't find a policeman. You won't find what you don't want to find. There are certain things we don't want to know, or as an old proverb said, the heart cannot receive what the mind cannot conceive. So this is our first major hurdle before we go any deeper. Either you see the complexity and design elements of the world and believe that there is a great artist behind it all, and that you are, as Psalm 139 says, fearfully and wonderfully made, or you don't, and life is basically meaningless. But if that were the case, you probably wouldn't have made it this far. So congratulations. You're already well on your way to finding the answers that you've been looking for. Let's press on. The first chapter of the Bible is full of "and God said" statements. It happened over and over again. It's organized, it's detailed, it's specific and poetic. Imagine being there as God spoke, and then the stars burst into being, the sun, the moon, the animals, everything. He made all of this by the power of His Word and the movement of His Spirit, and at the end said it was very good. You might even say, perfect. And after all of this, God did something a little unusual, a little unexpected. He created mankind. In Genesis 1:26, God said, "Let us make man in our image." Male and female, He created them in the image of God. Now in Latin, it's called the Imago Dei, the image of God. All the rest of creation was made to display God's creativity and glory. But you and I were created to actually reflect His character, His passion, and His unique ability to love and to create. And just like all the rest of creation, God made humanity without defect, innocent and beautiful. There was no fear, no shame, no guilt, no insecurities, and no heartache. Sounds like heaven, doesn't it? And it sounds almost perfect. Well, that's how it all started. It just didn't stay that way for very long. You see, when God created humanity in His own image, He gave us something that sets us apart from the rest of creation. He gave us free will, the ability to choose, the capacity to love and to worship, because He wanted an honest, free relationship with us. So here you have a God so powerful that He creates entire galaxies with the power of His Word, and yet so personal that He wants a one-on-one relationship with creatures like us. Sometimes it's really hard to wrap your head around that one, isn't it? That this God, so awesome and powerful, is also so loving and trusting that He left the choice up to us. So do you see what's coming next? Now here we come to perhaps the most important part of the Bible, because it describes the tension we experience every day, tension between good and evil, right and wrong, love and betrayal, sorrow in death, joy in birth, and the beauty of a sunset. It describes how the world got the way it is and why we believe it should be and can be different. It helps us understand the driving force of human behavior and our desperate longing for meaning and purpose in a rather chaotic world. Okay, so here you have Adam and Eve enjoying the garden, enjoying each other, working in the garden, walking and talking with God daily. And then it happens. Temptation enters the scene and sows the seeds of our own destruction that are still haunting us today. The first seed is the seed of distrust. Doubt and distrust work like cancer in a relationship, stealing the joy that we were meant to have together. Now, when the snake asks Eve, "Did God really say?" he's questioning what we know about what God said and why. Can you have anything that you want? Why not? Is God holding out on you? Who's in control here? You deserve better than this. Now, when Eve's response is not exactly what God said, the serpent pounces quickly. "But you will not die, for God knows," which is really a not so subtle way of saying that God has been deceiving you He's been taking advantage of you. And so this creates an appetite for power. We want to be in control, to make the rules, to rule over others. We are certainly status-conscious people and spend incredible amounts of money to show it. And so the serpent whispers in Eve's ear, you can be like God. You can be in charge, to do what you like, when you like. This is followed by the seduction of pleasure. When she saw the fruit, that it was good and pleasing and desirable, she took some and ate it. Genesis 3:6. Now, have you ever had what is called buyer's remorse? It comes when we satisfy a short-term emotional desire we thought we had to have, only to find out, sometimes painfully, that it wasn't really everything that we thought it would be. Things will never replace our relationship with God. Now, I'm sure some of you already know what happened next. Eve took the bait. She ate it and then gave some to Adam, and he ate it too. Have you ever broken a promise to a friend, lied to hide what you did, or talked behind the back of someone that you really cared about? Then you're reliving this moment in the garden when Eve was tempted to do what was in her best interest in that moment at the cost of a relationship. You see, the story of Genesis is not ancient history or Greek mythology. It is who we are and why we often hurt the ones we love. Now, the temptation in the garden really boils down to this. Will I choose my way, my life by my rules, under my power, using my own cleverness, greed, and scheming to get what I want and to satisfy my desires? Or will I trust God to guide me, following God's ways, yielding to His goodness and surrendering my will to His wisdom because I trust Him and depend on Him, accepting His yeses and trusting His no's as part of our personal relationship? Now, the instant they ate the fruit, they broke the bond of trust that had existed between them and God. And now it seems that two things happened to them almost immediately. Most of the problems that we face and the breakdown of our society in general comes in large part to these two ever-present realities. The first was an overwhelming sense of shame. Their eyes were opened, and they saw themselves differently. They realized that they were naked, and they were ashamed of it. Shame is different from guilt. Shame is the feeling that you, as a person, just aren't good enough. You're flawed, you're ugly, and maybe even unlovable. We are all plagued with feelings of inadequacy, insecurity, and fear of being exposed for who we really are. We feel naked and vulnerable. We want to hide our weakness and cover our flaws. We spend incredible amounts of time and money and energy to buy things to make it appear that we have it all together. This was followed up by an overwhelming sense of shame, of fear. We are afraid of life, of death, of disease, of being truly known, of being exposed for who we really are. We're afraid of the future, but we don't know where to turn. So we overspend. We overcompensate for the time that is slowly slipping by. We keep busy pretending it doesn't matter. We know our thoughts, our past, and we don't like what we see deep inside. And so most people try to hide behind their careers, possessions, or achievements. But what we're really doing is hiding from God. Now, when Adam and Eve chose the apple, they betrayed God, the garden, and the relationship that they had enjoyed for so long. And when they were confronted with this predicament, Adam was totally without remorse, and actually went so far as to shift the blame to God for the problems that Adam himself had created. There was nothing left to do but to separate. And that's the next great lesson from the paradise story. We make our choices, and then our choices make us. The lesson here is that life is not without consequences. Adam and Eve and all of humanity were exiled from paradise. We long for home, for beauty and peace and perfection, but we cannot find it on our own terms. The poison of pride is always with us. But that's not the end of our story, so stay tuned for more. Okay, so here's what we know so far. First, we know that God loves you and made you, and He knows everything about you. I like to tell people here that God loves you more than you love you. Now let that sink in for a minute, because it's going to be the key to the rest of our story. God knows more about you than you know about yourself. Well, He should. I mean, after all, He made you. He gave you your eye color, your talents for music, your witty sense of humor, and your love for chocolate or maybe ice cream. Now, when we do things that we know are in our own self-interests, that hurt others, and we know is wrong, it's called sin. Think of it this way. Imagine that your life is like a car that was meant to run only on gasoline. But because we have the ability to choose, we didn't want to be restricted to one kind of fuel or to have somebody else tell us what we could or couldn't do. We wanted to do all kinds of things. So we tried all kinds of fuels. Now imagine trying to run your car on different kinds of fuel like diesel or vegetable oil, alcohol, or maybe even orange juice. It doesn't work very well, does it? Not because these are bad things in their proper place, but because our cars are not designed and built to run on them. Cars were designed to run on a certain way for a certain purpose. Anything else is a disaster in the making. Well, we've tried to run our lives on things like popularity, possessions, power, privilege, sometimes with disastrous results. Not because these are bad things, but we were just not meant to live for them as the most important thing, as the fuel for our lives. St. Augustine once said, "You have made us for yourself, O God, and our hearts are restless until they rest in Thee." Our lives were designed by God for a relationship with God. We don't need a tune-up, we need an overhaul. And believe me, an engine overhaul can be incredibly expensive. But it doesn't even compare to the cost of a heart overhaul. In fact, the cost is far beyond anything that we can imagine on our own. But more about that coming later. The point is that we need help. And the rest of the Old Testament is an ongoing story of God trying to teach us and lead us in how to run this thing called life, how to save us from ourselves when our natural inclination is to resist, to burn out, blow up, and break down time and time again, and then cry out for help like a stubborn child. We just don't learn. It's as if we have a natural impulse for selfishness. That's the disease that we call sin. Sin of rebellion, sin of ambition, and suspicion all rolled up into one that haunt us even today. Okay, so let me summarize. So we know that we were created for a loving relationship with God. We know that we have a selfish, sometimes destructive behavior that we call sin. And we know that we often have, our choices have consequences. Robert Louis Stevenson once said that everyone, sooner or later, sits down to a banquet of their own consequences. Well, friends, that pretty much takes us through the first session, Paradise Lost. That's a lot to digest, but I hope that it gives you some incentive to dig deeper. There's more ahead, a lot more, and I look forward to sharing this amazing adventure with you. So look over the reading at the end and then answer the questions the best that you can. And remember that a consistent daily reading schedule, a brief prayer at the beginning, and an open mind will cement what we've talked about today. I look forward to seeing you next time. Till then, God bless.